The morning mist clung to Lake Erie's surface like a shroud, concealing the destiny that would unfold beneath the September sun of 1813. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry stood on the deck of his flagship, the USS Lawrence, watching. The ghostly silhouettes of British vessels emerged from the haze. At 28 years old, Perry commanded a makeshift fleet that represented America's last hope for controlling the Great Lakes and perhaps the entire northwestern frontier. The young Commodore's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the ship's rail, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. Behind him lay the American shoreline, where desperate settlers and soldiers awaited news that would determine whether British forces would sweep down from Canada to reclaim the territories lost in previous campaigns. The War of 1812 had dragged on for over a year, and the Northern Front hung in precarious balance. Perry's fleet was a testament to American ingenuity and determination. Most of his vessels had been constructed in the wilderness of Erie, Pennsylvania, using timber cut from virgin forests and iron hauled hundreds of miles through barely passable roads. The Lawrence herself, named after Captain James Lawrence, who had died uttering the immortal words, "Don't give up the ship," carried 20 guns and bore a battle flag emblazoned with those very words in white letters again. St. Blue fabric, across the water. Captain Robert Heriot Barclay commanded the British squadron with equal resolve. His flagship, HMS Detroit, mounted 19 guns and flew the Union Jack with pride that had been earned through decades of naval supremacy. Barclay, a veteran of Trafalgar where he had lost an arm serving under Nelson, understood that control of Lake Erie meant control of the entire region's supply lines and military movements. The British captain faced his own challenges. His ships were undermanned, his crews a mixture of seasoned sailors and hastily pressed Canadian militiamen. Supplies ran short, and the approaching winter meant that if he failed to break American control of the lake now, his forces might face starvation before spring. The pressure from his superiors weighed heavily. General Isaac Brock's earlier victories had raised expectations that Barclay felt bound to fulfill, even in death. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, both fleets began their deadly dance. Perry's squadron consisted of 9 vessels of varying sizes, from the powerful Lawrence and her sister ship Niagara to smaller schooners and gunboats. The British flotilla numbered 6 ships, but they carried long-range cannons that could devastate enemy vessels before the Americans could close to effective fighting distance. According to historical accounts preserved in the Naval History and Heritage Command Archives, the battle would prove to be one of the most decisive naval engagements in American history. The wind favored neither side initially, creating an eerie calm that amplified every creak of timber and snap of canvas. Perry walked among his men, offering quiet words of encouragement. Many were young, some barely old enough to shave. Yet they had volunteered to face the world's most powerful navy on behalf of their young republic. Their faces showed the same mixture of determination and apprehension that had marked American forces since Lexington and Concord. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through history, determining not just the fate of the Great Lakes, but the very character of the American nation itself. At 11:45 in the morning, the wind shifted to favor the American fleet, and Perry seized his moment. Signal flags snapped up the Lawrence's mast, ordering the squadron to engage the enemy line. The British ships, led by Barclay's Detroit, had formed in battle formation with their long guns trained on the approaching Americans. The distance between the fleets narrowed steadily as Perry's vessels drove forward under full sail. The HMS Detroit opened fire first, her long 24-pound cannons sending iron death screaming across the water. The shots fell short, sending up towering columns of spray that drenched both fleets in the lake's cold water. Perry maintained his course, knowing that his shorter-range carronades would prove devastating once he closed the gap. But the intervening minutes would test every man's courage. Captain Barclay paced his quarterdeck with practiced calm, his empty sleeve pinned neatly to his uniform coat. He had faced Napoleon's fleet at Trafalgar and lived to tell the tale. These American upstarts, however brave, lacked the experience of his seasoned gunners. His strategy was simple: uses superior long-range firepower to cripple the American flagship. Before the enemy could close to effective range, the British guns found their mark as the range closed. A 24-pound ball crashed through the Lawrence's bulwark, sending deadly splinters flying among Perry's crew. Men screamed as the razor-sharp wood fragments cut them down, their blood staining the deck planks dark red. Yet Perry stood firm, his voice carrying clearly over the din of battle as he encouraged his men to hold their fire until they could make every shot count. Jesse Elliott, commanding the Niagara, held his position at the rear of the American line, waiting for Perry's signal to engage. The 29-year-old captain watched in growing concern as the Lawrence absorbed punishment that would have sent lesser vessels to the bottom. Smoke began to pour from the flagship's gun ports as her crew prepared to answer the British fire. At 12:15, Perry gave the order his men had been waiting for: "Fire as your guns bear." The Lawrence's carronades roared in unison, their massive 32-pound balls crashing into the Detroit's hull with devastating effect. The British flagship shuddered under the impact, her elegant lines marred by gaping holes that exposed her inner workings. Like wounds in living flesh, the smaller American vessels joined the battle as they came within range, their guns adding to the crescendo of destruction. The schooners Ariel and Scorpion raked the British line with grape shot, cutting down exposed sailors and Marines with murderous efficiency. The lake itself seemed to boil with the splash of missed shots and the debris of shattered vessels. Naval historian William S. Dudley's comprehensive analysis in the Naval War of 1812 documents the precise timing and devastating effectiveness of these opening exchanges. Captain Barclay felt his ship heel under the American bombardment, but his crew responded with the disciplined efficiency that had made the Royal Navy the terror of the seas. His gunners worked their pieces with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed to disable the American flagship's ability to fight. The Detroit's long guns had the advantage of range, and Barclay intended to use every yard of it. The battle's opening phase had begun with the methodical fury that would characterize the entire engagement. Neither commander was willing to give ground, and both fleets had committed themselves to a fight that could only end with complete victory or crushing defeat. The morning sun climbed higher, bearing witness to courage and carnage in equal measure. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Lawrence had become a floating hell. British shot had torn through her rigging, leaving canvas hanging in tatters and spars shattered like broken bones. Perry's flagship absorbed the concentrated fire of 3 British vessels, her hull holed in dozens of places above and below the water line. The deck ran red with the blood of American sailors, yet the surviving crew continued to serve their guns with grim determination. Perry moved among his men like a man possessed, seemingly immune to the iron storm that swept his deck. A British cannonball had carried away his hat, another had torn his coat, but the young Commodore remained upright and defiant. His voice rose above the thunder of the guns, rallying his crew with words that would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. "We have met the enemy, and they shall not pass." The British were not having an easy fight of it either. The Detroit had suffered terrible damage from the Lawrence's heavy carronades, her port side showing multiple breaches that allowed lake water to pour into her lower decks. Captain Barclay himself had been wounded twice, blood seeping through his uniform coat, but he refused to leave his position on the quarterdeck. His one remaining arm gestured constantly, directing the fire of his guns with the expertise of a veteran who had learned his trade under Nelson himself. The HMS Queen Charlotte, commanded by Captain Robert Finnis, moved to support the Detroit, her guns adding their voice to the British bombardment. But American resistance proved fiercer than expected. The schooner Caledonia, under Lieutenant Daniel Turner, positioned herself to rake the Charlotte's stern, her guns firing into the British ship's most vulnerable area with deadly effect. Jesse Elliott aboard the Niagara found himself in an impossible position. The wind patterns and positioning of other vessels prevented him from bringing his ship effectively into the battle line. He watched in growing frustration as the Lawrence absorbed punishment that should have been shared among the entire American squadron. His own crew grew restless, eager to join the fight that was determining the fate of their young nation. The smaller vessels of both fleets engaged in deadly duels of their own. The British brig Hunter exchanged fire with the American schooner Scorpion, their lighter guns creating a rapid staccato counterpoint to the deeper thunder of the ships of the line. Sailors fell on both sides, their bodies sliding across blood-slicked decks as their comrades continued the deadly work of loading and firing. By 1:30, the Lawrence had been reduced to a wreck. Of her crew of 103 officers and men, 83 had been killed or wounded. Her guns were dismounted, her rigging destroyed, and water poured through holes in her hull. Yet Perry refused to surrender, his battle flag still flying defiantly from what remained of his mainmast. Contemporary accounts preserved in the American state papers document the incredible casualties sustained by both fleets during this phase of the engagement. Captain Barclay, observing the American flagship's condition, ordered the Detroit to close for the killing blow. His own ship was badly damaged, listing to port and taking on water, but her guns remained operational. The British captain believed victory was within his grasp if he could force the Lawrence to strike. Her colors, the rest of the American squadron might lose heart and withdraw, but Oliver Hazard Perry had not yet begun to fight. As his flagship wallowed helplessly under British guns, the young Commodore conceived a desperate plan that would either save his fleet or see him die in the attempt. The battle's outcome still hung in the balance, and Perry was determined to tip the scales in America's favor no matter the cost. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the carnage, its light reflecting off the lake's surface now fouled with debris, blood, and the oil from shattered vessels. The decisive moment of the battle approached, and both sides prepared for the final, desperate throw of the dice. At 2 o'clock, with the Lawrence reduced to a shattered hulk, Perry made the decision that would secure his place in naval history. Grabbing his personal battle flag, the blue banner, bearing Lawrence's dying words, "Don't give up the ship," he prepared to transfer to the Niagara. The British gunfire had slackened momentarily as they, too, assessed the damage to their own vessels, providing Perry with a narrow window of opportunity. For sailors volunteered to row Perry across the bullet-swept waters between the disabled Lawrence and the fresh Niagara. The small boat danced across the waves under a hail of musket fire from British Marines, who recognized the importance of the figure standing resolute in the stern. Balls whistled past Perry's head, splashing into the lake inches from the boats. Gun wails, but the Commodore never flinched. His calm demeanor inspired the oarsmen to pull with superhuman strength through the gauntlet of lead. Captain Barclay, observing Perry's transfer from the Detroit's battered quarterdeck, realized with growing alarm that the American commander was far from beaten. The one-armed veteran had seen enough naval battles to recognize a dangerous opponent, and Perry's willingness to expose himself to enemy fire while transferring his flag spoke volumes about the man's character. Barclay ordered his gunners to concentrate their fire on the small boat, but the range was too great for accurate shooting with the light weapons available. Jesse Elliott watched Perry's approach with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The Niagara was still relatively undamaged, her guns loaded and her crew eager for action. Elliott had chafed under his inability to engage effectively, but now he would have his chance to contribute to what might become a famous victory or a glorious defeat. As Perry's boat bumped against the Niagara's side, Elliott prepared to receive his superior officer. Perry clambered aboard the Niagara with his battle flag clutched tightly in his fist. His uniform was torn and blood-stained, his face blackened with powder smoke, but his eyes blazed with unquenched determination. The transfer had taken only 15 minutes, but those minutes had seemed like hours to every man who witnessed them. Now Perry faced his supreme test: could he rally his scattered fleet and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? The British squadron had not remained idle during Perry's transfer. The Detroit, despite her damage, continued to pour fire into the helpless Lawrence, while the Queen Charlotte moved to support her flagship. Captain Finnis had been killed by American grape shot, but his first officer maintained the ship's position in the battle line. The smaller British vessels maneuvered to prevent the Americans from concentrating their fire on any single target. Perry's first order aboard the Niagara was to signal the scattered American vessels to close and engage. The fresh breeze that had favored the opening of the battle now carried his commands across the water, and one by one his captains acknowledged the signal. The schooners Ariel, Scorpion, Porcupine, and Tigress began to converge on the British line, their lighter guns preparing to add their weight to the renewed assault. The transfer of Perry's flag has been documented in numerous historical accounts, including James Fenimore Cooper's authoritative History of the Navy of the United States of America. At 20, Perry hoisted his battle flag to the Niagara's mainmast and gave the order that would determine the battle's outcome: engage the enemy more closely. The fresh American flagship surged forward under full sail, her carronades loaded with double charges of grapeshot that would sweep the British decks clean of everything living. The moment of truth had arrived, and Perry intended to seize it with both hands. Captain Barclay, his strength ebbing from multiple wounds, watched the Niagara's approach with the resignation of a professional sailor who recognized superior tactics. The American Commodore had outmaneuvered him, bringing a fresh ship against his battered squadron at the crucial moment. Yet Barclay was determined to sell his ships dearly, fighting to the last gun in the tradition of the Royal Navy. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and both commanders knew that the next 30 minutes would determine not just the fate of their fleets, but the future of the entire Great Lakes region. The Niagara bore down on the British line like an avenging angel, her fresh crew eager to redeem their earlier inaction. Perry positioned his ship to pass between the Detroit and Queen Charlotte, a maneuver that would allow his powerful carronades to rake both British vessels simultaneously. The tactical situation had reversed completely now. It was the Americans who held the advantage of position and firepower. At 30, the Niagara's guns spoke with devastating effect. Her port battery raked the Detroit from stem to stern, the 32-pound balls crashing through the British flagship's wounded hull like sledgehammers through glass. Simultaneously, her starboard guns poured their deadly cargo into the Queen Charlotte, the grapeshot sweeping the British ship's deck and silencing half her guns in a single terrible broadside. Captain Barclay fell to his deck, blood pooling beneath him from wounds that would prove mortal. The Detroit's wheel was shot away, her steering cable severed, leaving the ship helpless to maneuver. The one-armed veteran who had fought at Trafalgar struggled to rise, but his strength was finally spent. Command of the British squadron devolved to his surviving officers, men who lacked his experience and tactical brilliance. The Queen Charlotte, attempting to avoid the Niagara's devastating fire, collided with the Detroit in a grinding crash of splintered timber and tangled rigging. The two British ships became locked together, presenting a perfect target for American gunners who could hardly miss at such close range. Perry seized the opportunity immediately, ordering his helmsman to position the Niagara where her guns could command both disabled vessels. Jesse Elliott, transferred to one of the smaller American vessels at Perry's direction, led the schooners Ariel and Scorpion in a coordinated attack on the British flanks. The lighter American vessels darted in and out like wasps around a wounded bear, their guns adding to the concentrated fire that was reducing the British squadron to floating wreckage. The tide of battle had turned decisively in America's favor. The HMS Lady Prevost, commanded by Lieutenant Edward Buchan, attempted to escape the carnage by running for the Canadian shore, but the American schooner Tigress pursued relentlessly, her crew sensing victory and determined to prevent any British vessel from escaping to fight another day. The chase lasted 20 minutes before the Lady Prevost, her hull holed and her crew decimated, struck her colors in surrender. Aboard the shattered Detroit, the surviving British officers faced an impossible situation. Their flagship was taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. Her guns were dismounted, and her crew was reduced to a handful of wounded men. The Queen Charlotte was in similar condition, her captain dead and her hull breached in multiple places. Resistance had become not just futile, but suicidal. Naval records preserved in the British Admiralty archives confirm the devastating effectiveness of Perry's tactical maneuver. During this phase of the battle. At 3 o'clock, the first British ship struck her colors. The brig Hunter, overwhelmed by fire from multiple American vessels, hauled down her ensign in token of surrender. One by one, the remaining British ships followed suit, their proud Union Jacks fluttering down in acknowledgement of defeat. The Royal Navy, master of the seas for over 2 centuries, had suffered its first squadron-level defeat in living memory. Perry watched the British surrender from the Niagara's quarterdeck with a mixture of elation and exhaustion. The battle had lasted less than 4 hours, but those hours had aged him beyond his 28 years. Around him lay the debris of the most significant naval engagement ever fought on the Great Lakes, its outcome destined to change the course of the War of 1812. The young Commodore's thoughts turned immediately to his duty informing his superiors of the victory that had secured American control of Lake Erie. History waited for his words, and Perry was determined to choose them carefully. The message he would compose in the next few minutes would become one of the most famous dispatches in naval history. As the British flags came down one by one, Perry surveyed the carnage that victory had caused. The lake's surface was littered with debris, shattered spars, torn canvas, and the tragic flotsam that marked where brave men had died for their country's causes. The Lawrence drifted helplessly, her hull so perforated that only the skill of her remaining crew kept her afloat. Blood stained the water round both fleets, a crimson reminder of the price paid for control of these inland seas. Perry's first concern was for the wounded and dying. British and American alike received care from the fleet's surgeons. Nationality forgotten in the face of shared suffering, Captain Barclay, grievously wounded but still alive, was carried aboard the Niagara, where Perry personally ensured he received the best medical attention available. The two commanders, enemies minutes before, spoke quietly of the battle while surgeons worked to save the British officer's life. The tally of casualties sobered even the most jubilant American sailors. The Lawrence had lost 83 of her crew of 103, a casualty rate that would have broken lesser men. The British had suffered similarly, with the Detroit and Queen Charlotte bearing the heaviest losses. In total, nearly 400 men had been killed or wounded in less than 4 hours of fighting, a testament to the deadly efficiency of naval warfare in the age of cannon and grapeshot. Lieutenant Yarnall, Perry's second-in-command on the Lawrence, made his report with voice cracking from exhaustion and emotion. Every officer except himself and Perry had been killed or wounded. The ship's surgeon had died at his post, continuing to treat the injured until a British cannonball ended his service forever. Such sacrifice demanded recognition, and Perry was determined that history would remember these men's courage. Jesse Elliott approached Perry with congratulations that seemed hollow. Given the day's carnage, the Niagara's captain had fought well, once engaged, but his delay in entering the battle would haunt him for the rest of his career. Perry accepted Elliott's compliments with grace, though privately he wondered what might have been accomplished if the Niagara had joined the fight earlier. Such thoughts, however, belonged to future historians. His immediate duty was to inform his superiors of the victory. Sitting in the Niagara's cabin, Perry took up his pen to compose the dispatch that would electrify the nation. The words came slowly at first, then with increasing confidence as he found the perfect expression for the day's triumph. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours," he wrote, then paused to consider the magnitude of what had been accomplished. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop, an entire British squadron captured or destroyed. The strategic implications of the victory were immediately apparent to Perry's experienced eye. British forces in Detroit and along the northwestern frontier were now cut off from their supply lines. General William Henry Harrison could move against these isolated garrisons with confidence, knowing that British reinforcements could not reach them across Perry's Lake. The victory at Lake Erie had effectively secured the entire Northwestern Territory for the United States. Historical accounts from the War Department archives document the immediate strategic impact of Perry's victory on subsequent land campaigns. As evening fell over Lake Erie, Perry ordered his fleet to anchor near Put-in Bay, where they could tend their wounded and repair their battle damage. The captured British vessels were taken under American control, their crews made prisoners of war in accordance with the customs of civilized warfare. Perry personally ensured that Captain Barclay and his officers received treatment befitting their brave conduct during the battle. The young Commodore stood on his quarterdeck as darkness claimed the lake, reflecting on the day that had changed his life forever. At dawn, he had been an untested naval officer commanding a makeshift fleet. Now, as stars appeared overhead, he was the hero of the most decisive naval victory in American history. The weight of such fame would follow him for the rest of his days, but for now, he was content to savor the moment of triumph. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, caring for the wounded, securing the prisoners, and preparing dispatches for Washington. But tonight belonged to the men who had fought and died to secure American control of the Great Lakes, their sacrifice ensuring that the young republic would survive its second war with Britain. Dawn broke over Lake Erie on September 11th, 1813, revealing the full scope of the previous day's triumph. The American fleet rode at anchor in Put-in Bay, their battle flags flying proudly above vessels that bore the scars of hard fighting. Alongside them lay their prizes. The entire British squadron that had once dominated these waters now served under the stars and stripes, their Union Jacks replaced by the symbol of American determination. Perry rose early to tend to his responsibilities, beginning with a visit to the wounded of both sides. In the makeshift hospital established aboard the larger vessels, American and British sailors lay side by side, their suffering a reminder that courage recognized no nationality. Captain Barclay, his wounds tended by American surgeons, spoke quietly with Perry about the battle, both men sharing the peculiar bond that exists between warriors who have tested each other's mettle. The dispatches Perry had composed the previous evening were now ready for transmission to his superiors. His famous message to General Harrison, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours," would become one of the most quoted communications in naval history, its simple eloquence capturing the magnitude of American achievement on the Great Lakes. The victory had cost dearly in blood and treasure, but it had secured the northwestern frontier for the United States. Word of the victory spread rapidly throughout the American territories. General Harrison, freed from the threat of British naval interference, immediately began preparations for his assault on Detroit and the invasion of Canada. The psychological impact proved as valuable as the strategic advantage. Americans who had endured months of British victories finally had a triumph to celebrate. And celebrate they did with bonfires, parades, and patriotic speeches from Maine to Georgia. The British response was swift and decisive. The Admiralty in London, stunned by the loss of an entire squadron, immediately began construction of new vessels for service on the Great Lakes. But the damage had been done. The crucial months of 1813 and 1814 would see American forces operating with naval superiority, enabling victories that would have been impossible under British control of the lakes. Perry's fame spread throughout the nation with remarkable speed. Newspapers from Boston to Savannah proclaimed him a hero worthy of comparison to John Paul Jones, while Congress voted him a gold medal and prize money that would secure his financial future. The young Commodore found himself lionized by a nation hungry for heroes, his name becoming synonymous with American naval prowess. The strategic consequences of Lake Erie extended far beyond the immediate military situation. Control of the Great Lakes opened the heart of the continent to American expansion, ensuring that future generations would inherit a nation stretching from sea to shining sea. The victory demonstrated that American naval construction and seamanship could match the world's finest, laying the foundation for the nation's eventual emergence as a global maritime power. Historical analysis by naval scholars consistently ranks the Battle of Lake Erie among the most decisive engagements in American military history, with consequences extending well beyond the War of 1812. For the men who fought the battle, recognition came in various forms. Many received promotions and prize money, while others carried wounds that would mark them for life. The families of those who died received pensions from a grateful nation. Though no amount of money could truly compensate for their loss, their sacrifice had purchased something invaluable: proof that the American Republic could defend itself against the world's greatest military power. As autumn progressed and the fleets withdrew to winter quarters, Lake Erie itself bore witness to the transformation that had occurred. Waters that had known the proud passage of British squadrons now saw American vessels carrying supplies and reinforcements to support Harrison's campaigns. The lake had become an American waterway, its control ensuring that the young nation's northwestern boundary would remain secure. The Battle of Lake Erie entered American folklore as surely as it entered the history books. Perry's courage, the sacrifice of his crews, and the tactical brilliance of the victory became part of the national story, told and retold to successive generations who would face their own challenges to American independence. On that September day in 1813, a young Commodore and his makeshift fleet had proven that American courage could triumph over any odds, ensuring that the flag of liberty would continue to wave over the Great Lakes for generations. Yet unborn, the thunder of the guns had faded, but their echo would resonate through history, a testament to the price of freedom and the courage of those willing to pay it.